Okay, so this is going to be a video about numerology and a way to clarify and reframe the practice, the art and science of numerology to suggest that people are looking at it in the wrong perspective, in a perspective that's counterproductive to what the real value or benefit in this so-called art and science actually is. So numerology is the so-called study, art and science, of seeing the occult or hidden significance of patterns and sequences of numbers. So some of you might be familiar with angel numbers. Angel numbers are sequences of digits recurring of the same type, so 111, 222 and 333 are examples of angel numbers. And it's said that seeing these numbers means something significant, something important is happening if you're seeing those numbers recurring at the same time. And each of these numbers and digits has a certain meaning. Like 1 symbolizes unity, and from a common sense angle that does actually make sense, because 1 is singular, so 1 represents the unity of everything, or the sovereignty of something, or the individuality of something. 2 represents opposition, which again makes sense if you think about the yin-yang, you think about the polar opposites, north-south, maybe even red-blue. So 2 has a connotation to mean opposing or dynamic. 3 would be more about dynamic, because 3 is often said to indicate harmony. So that's when there's a force to bring the two together. There's a video on Gematria, which is the study of looking at numerology using Jewish letters, which we'll get to. But that in the lecture, the man explains that 3 is sort of the connecting point between the two. So 3 represents harmony and creativity. Like a translator between 2 different languages is the 3rd component. 4 would represent stability, foundation, and that can be sort of intuitively sort of imagined through the square and the building of houses. Also, there are 4 cardinal directions, so there's north, south, east and west. So again, there's a sort of underlying idea that 4 represents foundation or principle or stability, even in a physical way. 5 would refer to risk and basically leaving the square, going out and doing something else. It's an adventure as well. Another element of dynamicness. 6 would represent love and fertility from some sources. 7 is a very spiritual number in connotation. 8 is seen to represent order and establishment, and 9 as unfolding mystery or coming to completion. And then we have 10, which is often represented to be a completion, which is also like a return to 1. Now, there are different systems that you can use. Gematria is the study of the Hebrew alphabet and the ways that each letter can represent a number. And each letter does represent a number, sorry. And if one looks at it in that way, then each word, represents a number, because you can add the value of each of the letters up in the word to create a number. And it's said that different words that have the same number have some connection. There is also the Pythagorean method, which is the one I'm going to focus on today, which is quite simple, and I'll put it at the top right, which is the simple use of getting the English alphabet and putting them in a sequence so that each letter represents a number. Therefore, you can use any word that you like, such as, life, for example. If we wanted to find the single numerical calculation of life with this Pythagorean method, we would take L, which is 3, I, which is 9, makes 12, F, which is 6, which makes 18, I believe, and finally we have E, which is 5, which would then add up to 23, and 23 have the two numbers 2 and 3, which you then add together to make 5. And this would suggest that life has, in this method, a connection to the number 5 with its definition, with its meaning of risk, adventure, boldness, breaking the grain. And so that's an underlying understanding of numerology. What people miss today, I think, is when we're approaching numerology as rational people, and we look at the definition, we're looking at it from a very, when we look at the study, we're looking at it from a very rational, analytic perspective, as if to say, this is pseudoscientific, this doesn't actually mean anything. It's almost like we're just trying to find patterns where there aren't any. And in some sense, that does make a lot of sense, because why would life have any correspondence inherently to the number 5? Why would it not be 1? Why would it not be 3? On another method, perhaps it would be 3 or 1. So what's the use of numerology if we're trying to understand ourselves better? Surely if we're going to be just adding arbitrary systems onto things, we're just going to be getting lost. And we're going to be trying to find relationships between things where there aren't any. We're going to get pseudoscientific. And in some sense, yes, that does actually happen. That is a rabbit hole that people fall into, where they try and find exact definitions for certain things, then try and follow those things. Like we all know about synchronicities. Some of us know about synchronicities and the Jungian idea of synchronicities, where we look for patterns, and some people can lose themselves in trying to find those patterns. I'm going to suggest something in the way that we think about numerology, that it's the process that matters, not the results. So what I mean by that, it's the process of doing numerology that counts and not the results, is based off of what we're trying to do when we're looking for something meaningful, or we're trying to expand our consciousness, or we're trying to develop our intuition, or we're trying to find a higher meaning. We're trying to navigate ourselves in ways that are more broadly suited to our deeper needs, our soulful needs, our spiritual needs. So when we're trying, when we get into the numerological practice and we try and find words and numbers and calculations, what are we exactly doing when we're attributing a word with a number? We're not just trying to find a result of, for example, life being 5. I assume I got that right, by the way. I don't know. I'll double check. It doesn't matter too much anyway. I think it is, yes, life's 3, 12, 6, 18. Yeah, so life would be 23, would be 5. What's happened in that process of me calculating it is I've undergone a mental change. I've gone into the recesses of my consciousness. I've taken this word life, and rather than follow all of the typical ways that I've been programmed to think of the word life, in all the ways in which I've seen it throughout my life, outside of all of that, I'm going into different neural pathways, and I'm unlocking a certain mental calculation, which takes a bit of mental work. Again, it's about the process, not the results, which I'll get to. And I discover a number that has been set for the word. I might have had an expectation for it to be a different number, or maybe I had an expectation for it to be that number. But now that life in this Pythagorean model is 5, I'm now immediately thinking about life in a completely different way. And where I am in my sort of mental landscape, in my mind, is now in a very different place from when I went from the beginning. So now I'm obviously, yes, I am thinking of life in a kind of way of its risk, its adventure, its nature trying to expound on herself and experiment. You know, some species die out, some species don't. Human beings are very risky creatures in the natural landscape. That reminds me of a video I watched a few days ago about the subject of mankind being a bold experiment of nature. But now my life word in my consciousness now has this new, which life a word that I use all the time, now has this new, very specific number that's been stuck onto it, and it's staying there because I've done the process of calculating it. I've maneuvered my consciousness myself. I haven't relied on a calculator to externalize a result to me because it doesn't stick as much. I've gone from one place in my consciousness and I've moved to a different place in my consciousness, and now the life has the number 5 in this way. And that's going to cause me to think about things in different ways. It's going to cause me to open up my consciousness. It's as though I've stepped into a new place, a new sort of reality almost, where the previous reality has been closed. So why is this important? When we're looking to expand our mind and intuition, we're doing it because we expect that in the horizon of learning this stuff, in the horizon of enlightenment, there is a better consciousness waiting for us. There is a vaster landscape that we haven't got access to it. But we don't realize that we need to actually position ourselves from where we are and move node by node in this nervous system that we inhabit into this newer landscape where things are better and things are more expansive and things are more meaningful. So what we have to do is, in expanding our consciousness and intuition, we have to do the work ourselves. We have to allow ourselves to go into a specific route, a sort of difficult place that allows our minds to evolve. It allows our minds to broaden our landscape. We actually have to do the work to expand our consciousness. We can't just, if we're doing this seriously, if we're doing magic seriously, we're not supposed to just have the ideal just there somewhere else. Like, we look at it and we glance at it when we're in the mood and be like, oh yeah, that sounds really nice, but I've got something else I've told myself I need to get on with. No, it's not good enough. We need to take seriously the process so that we actually live in this illumined consciousness, so we become higher consciousness ourselves. And that's why the process is important, even though it's difficult and annoying. The fact that it's difficult and annoying actually shows you where your invisible walls are. Right. Plato's cave. So we're all familiar, well, a lot of us are familiar with the concept of Plato's cave. It's also evident in the Matrix. It's the idea that you have these people in the cave and they see shadows on the wall made by puppets behind them, and they take the puppets to be real, but they don't know that they're actually in a cave. They're much more confined in their senses than they realize. And to be enlightened is to come to awareness of this and slowly leave the cave. The similar thing happens in the Matrix when Neo takes the red pill, and Neo subsequently has this very dizzying, disorienting experience before he wakes up into the real world. In the real world, things are much more different than he expected. The people that he knew are actually in these little cocoons, and it's very similar to the allegory of the Matrix. of Plato's Cave, sorry. So, when we talk about social conditioning and programming, we can think about Plato's Cave as a metaphor for entrenchment. And this word I'm going to use, entrenchment, is a word that refers to things that many people have spoken about. Robert Anton Wilson thinks about it a lot. Deleuze and Guattari think about the same concept. Baudrillard, which also inspired The Matrix, and I believe came up with the idea of the code and the matrix in his works, has a similar thing, which is we start unconditioned. We start in the world as children, and we're very open. We're very open. We haven't got any preordained programs. We haven't got habits. Anything is possible. Anything could be anything. Senses are much more vivid, and time is much slower. We haven't got an ego. We haven't got complexes. We might have ancestral trauma, but we don't have life-created trauma that we then attribute specific associations with. And over time, what happens is that as we get educated and as we get sort of put into this system, we start to pick up certain cues because they're all around us. They're indicated in our culture, in our money, in society, in the interactions people have. And so often we'll have parents or teachers or whatever tell us that we can't do a certain thing, or we just notice sort of peripherally that they're not actually as engaged or aware of the possibilities as they might claim, because they're not moving anywhere. They're kind of in the same place. They're doing what someone else did. They're sort of anticipating getting away from it, or something, like from some holiday is normally some substitute for the sort of the monotony that has been built around them, and they perpetuate. But so over time we end up adopting these programs, and we start to we start to get very compressed. So we start to become like the adults that we were surrounded by. We start to value certain things like money and cars and whatever, showing off things. These are very, very, very cartoonish examples, but they still hit the point home, I think. And over time, we develop these needs, these fears, these desires, and one can think about the ways in which this happens through just what we're surrounded by, what we're influenced and inspired by, or the lack of. When we're children, we're very curious. We always want to know why about things, which means that we are very keen and eager to look inside things and create worlds out of it. So we have our imagination is fully registered, and it's very connected to the vividity of our senses. We're very, very sensorily aware as children. We're very prone to discomfort. We're very prone to be upset because one could argue it's because we don't know how to deal with our emotions. But another perspective is that we are very sensitive. We're just very sensitive because our senses are working to their full capacity. It's going to be natural if someone's senses are working to their full capacity, surrounded by others who aren't. He might be very put off by a noise that these people who are very desensitized won't be annoyed by, because they won't turn the they won't turn the annoying cooker off, but this person who's very sensitive would be annoyed about that sound. So what happens is that over the years we end up getting compressed, and we end up adopting these peripheral programs because we don't have the resources to think of anything else. We haven't been given anything else. We are simply given sort of a lot of different kinds of instructions, and we get to pick our instructions, but we're still implanted them. You can see examples of this kind of programming in the ways that we construct sentences. For example, when you're buying something, it's very typical when asked about how you're going to pay for it, whether it's going to be cash or card, but you're never going to hear someone say, is that going to be card or cash? If they are, they're kind of playing a bit of a trick. And maybe on some unconscious level or conscious level, they know they're doing that, because we have been fed, and we feed ourselves the phrase cash or card, not card or cash. is that card or cash. It just doesn't, we don't say it. And there's loads of examples of this. In fact, the examples are kind of uncountable because of how much it occurs. You're thinking about money, you have certain connotations, you have adverts. We're thinking about, like, you know, what we see around us. Save might be very much a connecting point to money. So it's more of a landscape of different programs and a complete lack of anything else outside of that. Because our programs, because our cultural landscape is, for a lot of people, the main thing that inspires them. They don't go anywhere else. They absorb those programs because it's what everyone else does, and then they just do the same thing they're doing. They do the same thing that other people are doing, etc. So what we got here? So what we end up doing is we end up relying on this external culture to know what's best. It's as though we're sort of saying, I'm just me, I don't know, I don't know what's good for me, I'm confused, I'm anxious or whatever. You know, like hypothetically, I'm not saying I am. And like, there's a big whole cultural world out there full of people that are very smart and they've all got specific occupations. I'm going to rely on that as a big external mind, almost like a parent, to tell me what I need. Because there's so much big world going on out there, they've probably got it all figured out. So if I just do what I'm good at, I'm not going to need I don't need to think for myself, basically, is kind of what happens. When we are more frustrated, when we're more unfulfilled, we will end up looking for other sources. And eventually those sources will end up becoming the primary thing that we're interested in, not the society per se. And these practices are often to do with intuition, what's hidden, waking the consciousness up, occult, metaphysic, esoteric, magic, witchcraft. All these things are kind of harking to something. It's like there's something familiar in it that we miss, that we want to go back to, but we can't really work out what that is, sort of thing. So it's when we have the willingness and the bravery to turn our backs on something out there and go inward to try and find something better, that we end up starting to find these practices such as numerology and gematria and all the rest of it. There might be examples of ways that the external world tries to give you your results for you, which occurs in very similarly, is the same sort of thing as being told what to think again. Like a horoscope chart. Oh, this is my daily horoscope chart. Okay, I won't look for love today, I'll look for love on Tuesday. Like, that's again a sort of something that's being given to us. Like it gets hit on our head and we have to follow it. If we turn our backs on that completely, we end up being sort of left alone. And when we're left alone, we have the capacity and the time, perhaps, the energy, the curiosity, the nagging need to find something else. We start to become aware that there's this unconscious wall around us. It's like we're trying to get inspired by something, but we don't know how. This is a kind of invisible wall feeling. And this is the entrenchment. This would be the acknowledgement that there's an invisible something that I can't see, that I need to scratch away. And that would be the cave. That would be the matrix. It would be the ways in which our mind, once plastic and free and open, unlocked to do anything. I can do anything. I can go there. I can go there. I can eat that today. I don't have to eat this today. I can go to this town. I can go to this country. I don't have to, I nothing's stopping me. All of my faculties are working. My nervous system is working. that's when we we turn away from it. So yeah, okay. So we realize that in this process where we're unfulfilled and we're trying to find something better, we end up unlocking, we end up noticing bits of the invisible wall, little bits, and then we end up using sort of like a pickaxe to unfold, to moment by moment break these walls down. And we can't always do this 24/7 because, one, we are also entrenched, so we are ourselves in this program, in these programs, so we don't know how they're acting in us. We don't know when we're being influenced by them and when we're not being influenced by them, because we are, in a certain sense, trapped. We're unable to see the walls. Is that a wall? Is this a wall? I can't tell. So these tools, such as numerology and this Pythagorean method, are ways in which we can reliably use the pickaxe and find a wall. Let's go back to the example on life being 23/5. You yourself, as you watch me do the calculation, might feel a strong memory now of that, as I do, as this life thing being connected to, oh yeah, he's saying that again. And that's and that's because in that calculation, when I did it, I might have removed a lot of programs about life. Maybe I had a bunch of other associations that I didn't know were there. Now I've reconnected it to 5, and 5 is now making me think about other things in life, which is now going to start this seed planting where other ideas are going to come into the picture. And that process might have happened with you as well. So we can do this with any word, because what we find is when we do this, we are actually doing what is advertised. Milo Duquette, I think, says, like, you know, in some, everything advertised, nothing is expected. We're trying to find a deeper meaning of the word life and its numerological correspondence, but we don't find a specific meaning. And that's because a specific meaning wouldn't be valuable to us. We wouldn't get pleasure out of just tacking 5 onto life. What we want in our lives to be more fulfilled is to expand our consciousness. We want to see a higher picture. It wouldn't be good enough to just have a word next to a number. The process itself actually enables that. It sparks something. What is life? What is risk? What is adventure? What am I alive for? Maybe I should take more. You know, like that. It starts a process, and that process is a seed planter. And so I want to even suggest that, yes, you could use another method and get a different number, but let's say we stick to this method, right? There's no particular result. That the result itself isn't the goodie. The ability to unpack moment by moment what these things could be is, in a sense, to allow our tree, which is kind of, you know, in adult life, it's kind of wilted away and kind of, you know, like stuck in ways we don't know, to plant different roots. So we end up getting these like new little buds that appear. We're allowing new little buds to occur on the trees, which in a sense will restore this tree of our brains, of our minds, of our consciousness, of our nervous system. So these walls are the interesting thing, and I think what happens is that once we end up sort of learning this new language, we end up attributing letters to numbers in this new way. We're doing it without any particular command or program. We're doing it for the sake of trying to understand for its own right. We're not trying to get anything particular. We're just trying to understand ourselves and our minds a little bit better. And that lack of what would be the word? There's a word for it. That lack of pretense, it's sort of trying to get something else. I mean, that purity in just trying to uncover something is the sincere process of trying to understand ourselves, because we're not doing it for any ulterior motive. We're just trying to understand, like, where am I in my mind? Where are my biases? Where are my prejudices? Where are my conditions? And how can I start to develop a better way of thinking and feeling and perceiving that is less dominated by these programs? And I think for initiates, so occultic initiation, what happens is that the more we start to unravel and the more we start to come to our senses and remember more, and we grow this tree for ourselves, the more we realize that this is actually what's needed for humanity. So at the forefront, these activities look very silly. They look very playful. They look like they're done by someone who's just bored and just wants to make up games for themselves. And it's not very useful. Society's got lots of other much more serious things it needs to get on with, so what's the point in playing word games? Well, the problem is that society itself, the more you engage in these practices yourself, the more you realize how blind society actually is. And the reason society is blind is precisely because it's followed itself into this kind of mechanical stupor. Yes, institutions work fine, but they only work to perpetuate the system. They only work to make sure the system continues, because the system is just running off of itself. So yes, people will be met with their food, but as there's no impulse to create, and there's just a society that's working for itself, it's just going to make sure those people are fed and make sure those people are housed and all the rest of it, just so they can put more energy back into the system. So the bare minimum is met, but the bare minimum has not got any awareness or interest in the fulfillment or the actual mental processes of the human beings that live in it, the individuals that live in it. The individual finds themselves in this position where they're just inheriting alphabet, numeral kind of sequences, like buy stuff, like this person on Facebook, share, like, comment. They're just inheriting all of that, and as a result, they become it. You are what you eat. You become this. You just become a receptacle of that. And for most people, they've been given no education or encouragement to look outside of that, so they just follow it, and then they just become a part of that system. They just become this weird token of, you can think about it almost like, the way I think about it, and this might be a bit cryptic for some people, is that you have the alphabet, and someone who's free can see all the letters of the alphabet, but someone that is unfree and stuck in the system can only see a few of the letters. He can't see the other letters anymore. That's one way of thinking about it. Or perhaps he only sees a few words. A person who's free can see all the words on a page, but the person who is unfree will block out certain words on the page, whether they know it or not. Of course, you can't point it out to them because it's their blind spot. If you point out the word, you see that, they're like, oh yeah, I saw that, but then they'll forget about it a few seconds later, or they'll try and compensate. So we end up becoming blind to a lot of other things, and as a result, we become blind to our own memories, We become blind to possibilities. You know, all of the events that have happened in our lives where we could have gone a different direction to the alphanumerical landscape, they kind of get shut off. You can't remember alternatives as easily because you're not being invited to remember them. You're being invited to remember these very surface level societal expectations, norms, phrases, catchphrases, instructions, warning labels. That kind of becomes that dominates your mind so much that other alternatives just don't fit. Like, you know, I'm seeing this everywhere. Why would this obscure conversation I had 6 years ago matter? It doesn't. It's an exception. It would, you know, move away because society is not permitting you to think about those alternative avenues. Society is not going to, you know, at least in this society which is dreadfully unimaginative and dreadfully lacking in answers, solutions. So to return to why it's important is because when we're looking for solutions to problems, and that's in any avenue, it can be domestic, food, it can be political, religious, what we need is to have better minds and better mental faculties to actually solve the problems, that even the problems that everyone thinks matters, such as the economy. And the only way that's going to be the way in which we come across good solutions is to think better, is to have more avenues at our resources disposal to sort them out. The problem, people believe that this external mind out there has everything covered and they don't need to worry. But that's obviously not the case. When we see how confusing things are, we get a notion that things are wrong and we don't know how because it's an invisible wall. When we work on initiating ourselves more, it starts to become much more obvious. It starts to become something that you can see out there because it's no longer inside you. The program, such as the the desire to work for a week and then watch Netflix on the weekend, that monotony, that insanity becomes much more apparent. It becomes much more apparent. It becomes much more limiting as well. You start to see how people are saying the same things over and over again. You didn't realize it, but you were doing the same thing too. You thought, in your perspective at the time, when your tree was very wilted and minimal, you were speaking kind of, the phrases that came to mind felt fairly original at the time, but you start to realize you are painfully uninspired. And the way in which we think is a lot to do with language, the way that we speak. When we do calculations such as the numerology, we end up discovering new connections, which means that our inspiration starts to flourish and reseed itself. We're actually putting the work in to do that, because again, we can't just, for risk of repeating myself, we can't just know of it. We have to become it. We can't just know of inspiration and lots of different avenues of, oh yeah, I know that's a thing. We have to cultivate it in ourselves so that it's always ready to use. We have, so we've always got this faculty at hand. And the only way to do that is to unlock it ourselves piece by piece, using experimental sort of tactics perhaps that confuse us, they irritate us, disturb us at the time, because we're unpacking ourselves. We start to realize that these processes that we are involved in and we think we value, they're actually much smaller than we realize. They're much more basic. They're much more to do with what other people are doing. And that's because, again, we're this inspiration to follow the conveyor belt, and not to think for ourselves. So I think I'll leave it there. I think that covers a lot. But before I end, I just want to say that important aspect is we need to find the willingness, I think, to investigate a bit more, just to look inside more, look in things more, and realize the magnificent potential that can come from that, and realize how important that actually is. This might be the most important thing that we need as a species, or at least a civilization. Because if we can unlock and tap into these faculties to think about things in many directions, not just one. Again, another example of the one way that we've been thinking is it's like a bit like if the moment we tasted something we became blind because we can only see one thing at a time. We can only have one sense at a time. It's a lot very similar way to the way that people think about it. If we can expand our directions so that we can see things in multiple ways at the same time, which is how it should be. It's natural and organic to be able to see these multiple avenues at once. It's not multitasking, it's organic. To be able to see with a wider spectrum, we would be able to solve all of our problems much more rapidly. Whether they're infrastructural or political or whatever else, we'd be able to unravel and we'd be able to see the avenues. If there's difficulty with a business, we would just have the resources in our mind to think of better ways to do it, to think of ways to make money faster. If we're having a problem with our love life, we would immediately have ways to think about doing it properly. And the complexes that we would have developed that probably cause these problems would be disappearing as well, because those complexes, again, are built up as a result of this programming. So, numerology is about the process, not the results. Because if we are following the results, we are doing it blindly, and we are not expanding our consciousness. But if we undergo the process of unfolding, we subsequently unlock ourselves and actually become illumined ourselves. So I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.